Tanium threat response scenarios around hunting for evidence. The next set of use cases are going to be primarily around looking for types of evidence that you need to help with your investigation, or hunt or look for new indicators. The idea behind hunting isn't really about searching for the unknown. You kind of have to first know your environment and then be able to diff it. Look at the difference between what you do find and what you should be finding. Look at the difference between what's stacked as the lowest compared to the highest. Look at what's normally running on a box compared to what's not. So how do you do that? What's the type of information you need to gather? So a couple of these are going to be fairly simple, and we'll get a little more advanced as we kind of walk along here. The first one is looking for anything that is actually prevalent on a disk. Being able to find that file on any given machine based off of something that you've been given. Could be a tipper, or it could be maybe a malicious type of file you're looking for. So the first thing is, what I want to make sure that everybody's aware of is the power behind index. So index itself has multiple types of questions. You can look at query file counts, details, exists, permissions, lots of other things. Today what we're going to use is the query file details question. In here, there's multiple different types of parameters that can be used. And remember, any of this can also use regular expression as well, if you have a little more details you're looking for. Some of the primary things that I always look for files are maybe if I'm actually searching for bad user behavior, things that shouldn't be happening on my network. Simple things like the password.txt that can be searched for, or the pwt.txt file, or maybe someone who has a whole directory that they call passwords. And I've seen that before too, where you just literally just type in the passwords directory or password directory and look for anybody who has a directory for that. Those are very simple ways to hunt for badness on your network, things that people are not supposed to be doing. What's important here is that you can find these files and you can use something like live response to actually gather them. The thing I'll show you as well is something actually built into what's called live connections for file systems as well. So maybe once you found that malicious file and you want to actually grab it, you can actually come into the file browser and actually search down that file itself and actually be able to go into the file and maybe grab a specific thing you're looking for. In this case, it could be almost any type of file you're looking for, the intuser.dat, or maybe some type of log file, maybe it's their cookies, whatever information it might be, you could grab it directly off this block. So you can actually see anything within these directories. Pretty powerful there was items in there because there are going to be multiple systems that you're looking for, multiple information. And then what you can do is once you actually find the data that you're looking for, you can then actually click on it and download it. Remember, any of these can actually be gathered directly off the endpoint, so you can research them, look at them. Maybe it's a log file you're looking at. Maybe it is that password.txt file. When you download these, they're actually saved directly within threat response under files. And these files can be taken, and very simply, you can download them directly off of here by just clicking on download. You'll then be giving a zip file that you can then extract, and the password is specifically set for infected. The reason it's actually encrypted is in case it is a malicious file. So maybe you don't want to open up on the same environment. Maybe you take it to a sandboxed environment, a box that's offline, and actually run it there and do your analysis. So that's looking for files on disk. Running index query file details is a very simple way to do that. You can also use the same thing to run hashes against it, maybe looking for specific hashes. One thing you can do too is maybe you have specific file paths that you want to see and see what normally is within that path. Maybe within Windows System 32, there's only certain types of files there. Maybe you want to stack those and start looking at those files. It's a very simple way to kind of dig through multiple hosts at one time and also one host at a time. The next question that's really useful is actually the running processes that are actually in memory. Now, with running processes, there's multiple different types of questions. There's just the basic running processes question. What I want to point you to is the items that are actually within the threat response hunting platform. And one of those that's very useful in running processes are the ones that have specific hashes. And why you want to do this is every process might have a specific name that it shares. But what's also very useful here is you get a hash of that, which makes it much more unique. Then what you can do is do the other count. Look for things that are more rare. Why is this only running this spool SV on one box? Or why is this only running on one box? Of course, at that point, you can drill down, look into the system, what's actually there. You can actually get the specific computer name, of course. You can drill into that. You can get general information off of it. You can figure out the users that's logged in, that's running it. And what's important is you can look at one host just as much as you can look at multiple hosts at one time. Also, you can also deploy actions from here. So maybe you're doing your analysis and you find that you actually found a malicious running system out there, that Java W that we talked about before. As soon as you find that malicious thing running, you can always deploy an action to it to kill the process. You can jump right into remediation with questions like this. So keep that in mind. Another very simple and useful one is looking at everything that's installed on systems. Installed applications, even though it's more of a operations use case, there's a lot of good reasons to understand what the applications are there and the type of versionings. The one I like to do that's simply to look at what systems do I have there by a specific computer group. Maybe let's start with my Windows servers and maybe my domain controllers. I look at the domain controllers and I look at, hey, they shed the same applications across all of them. And I could do a sub count, and go the opposite direction with it, and actually start with one and look at, once again, look at those diffs. Why does this one box have it? Maybe stack these install applications by the domain controllers themselves. So basically just add the computer name with that filter around it, or if you have a computer group for it, even better, and actually start looking through those applications. What I would also do is immediately pivot from installed into something like running. These running applications also show a pretty good reason of why a system is acting the way it is. Because if it's running and it's actually currently running on the system, why would you have multiple different types of systems running different things? So for example, if one box is the only box out there running a specific thing like a SSHD executable, go investigate it. Figure out what that box is. Maybe what you want to do is pivot into trace and look at the live connection and actually pivot back and find that process and actually see why it spawned, who it spawned by. Another one that's really useful is looking at all the current active connections. So what you can do is actually run something called established connections. With established connections, you get a lot of details around the process itself that's currently running, but also then you can also see the target IP it went after. And of course, these are your TCP connections and over which port they're on as well. Once again, that stack option is super useful here, especially if you're hunting down a specific one. But maybe what you want to do is export this out and actually start looking to say, hey, I know that temp Unix okay, Tanium client's okay, but why is it only going out to these certain endpoints? Why are certain processes only connecting to certain ports? And start doing that diffing. A lot of this is really good information to potentially send out to a data analytic platform like Splunk, where you can actually stack them. You can look at them over time, look at different processes by different filters around them and also the different filters around ports. And the other one I like to use a lot other than established connections or some of the items around trace established connections. Now, trace established connections is going to use the actual trace database itself and actually look for connections within that database. And what's important here is you can get all the trace network connections that are actually occurring. And when you click on that, you're going to get a lot of details around the domain, user, the operation. The source IP is removed, and I'll explain why in a second. But you get that process image name. Now, what you can always do if you want more details, and this is how I normally recommend people use trace, is ask that first question, get the broad example. And what you want to do is when you actually look at the trace question, maybe go back, a day or whatever it might be, but don't skip unique yet. What I would first do is change this parameter to something large, like 100. So 100 is your max when you have make stackable. And what make stackable will do is actually remove certain columns to make sure it can stack better. So it'll remove stuff like time, because that's unique endpoint names. It'll remove stuff like source IPs and source ports in this example. But what it will do is give you a good quick count of everything on your environment. And once you have that actually selected, and you run it on your entire environment, you'll get more information of everybody that's out there. What that means is it's going to give you the 100 answers from every single endpoint. So what's cool is you'll get more stacks at that. And what I would do is actually get the counts just like I did with the other ones, and I would start looking at off counts. Like, why are only this one process running and only connecting this one time to this port? And start analyzing specific types of process names themselves, especially stuff like SQL. Why is SQL connecting out to other systems? Start diving through this. And what you can do is once you find one that kind of piques your interest a little bit, what I would do next is literally take the same exact question and I would drill down again. And this time change the parameters. Change it back to unique and go back to 10. And what you just did there is actually give you more information around the host that had that one thing. Remember, we only had a few hosts that had that count. So now I want to only get that specific filter based off of this, which means I'm going to get everybody that met that first selection of the row, and I get all the results. So as you'll see below, now I have another question that was asked, and I'll get all the additional information around it that are no longer stacked. You'll see that come up here in a second. And the reason that's important is you can kind of pivot back and forth. So as you do your analysis and you get those removed items, you're like, hey, I really want to know more about this path, process image path. And I want to know more why it's actually connecting out to these destination ports. You then can jump into actually diving into here, where now you get more information around the actual endpoint name, the source IP, and now you've gone down to one box. So what I would do here is immediately deploy an action to make a live connection. Or you can just jump that right back into live connections and threat response and connect to that endpoint. Another really useful one is not just the network connections themselves, but also the DNS connections as well. So you can go in to actually get every trace DNS connection. And this one is really useful if you want to see what's not normal for DNS queries out there. You know, what different boxes are actually making different queries, what's the top count for the top talkers, what are the low talkers, and do the same thing here and get results from the top 100 from every single endpoint out there. And what you'll see pop out really quickly is different queries that are happening in my environment. Well, boxes that they're going out to. They could be other systems within their own environment, or you can start stacking by people going out to something like Netflix or whatever it might be, and actually start seeing those queries happening in your environment. Once again, you can take those and then pivot right back into get more details by drilling into it and giving the full endpoint name, giving the time, and then giving more information around it. The next useful hunting one is browser history. Browser history is pretty powerful because what we're actually doing is have a sensor go out there and actually look at browser tools on the endpoint and pull back any browser history around browser, the URL domain's connected to. And what's useful here, and this is just an example in a demo that currently doesn't have any browser history in it, but you can actually get all the details around it. And so what you can actually have is dates they went to, the user that did it. Recommend installing browser history. It's lab content, and you can actually put in your environment. There's a few tools that get loaded on the endpoint, and there's a lot of information out there. Work with your team to get that done as well. Another very useful one is called process details. And with process details, you can actually have it be hashed, and you can actually look at specific host names that you want to get every detail around. And so what you can actually do is get the details from that actually host itself. And you'll see here what I'll do is I'll go out, and I'm going to do it against all hosts in this environment. And what we did is to make it more stackable. Once again, we got rid of username, the PIDs, but I can get every process name and the process path in its command line very quickly just by using process details. And so I get all those different running processes, everything in memory, and I get its own command line. So this is kind of the next step past process details. Because now you can stack stuff like the process name might be in a bad process path, or this process usually runs only these type of command lines, only has this type of hash. And you can take this data and start actually analyzing differences there. You know, why does this process run this command line only on this one box? Go analyze it, stuff like that. Also with trace, you're also going to use trace executing processes to get history of processes as well. And this is super powerful when you're thinking about, let me go back a whole week and understand every process that was run, maybe with something like PowerShell. And give me everybody who ran PowerShell over the last week and give me all 100 systems per. Now remember what you did here is you just went out, and anytime the process was used for process path having PowerShell, it's going to run it and find PowerShell in there and return you the results. Now what's really powerful here is you're also going to be able to pivot from here. Remember, I already made them stackable, but I only got one result. So what I want to do now is immediately know what this endpoint was. Now you could drill down and actually get the computer name, but I want all the other start and end time stuff around it as well. So once again, I can just drill down, paste in that same question. This time what I'm going to do, since it's only one endpoint, I'm just going to knock this back down to 10, which is its maximum, and get rid of make stackable again. And since I'm going to go back a week here, I'm going to keep it there. And once I run it, I'm going to get all the additional details that I'm looking for off those two boxes. And as that's running, this is kind of how I do every one. I look at it more broadly, look at what's happening, find something that seems like kind of exciting and something I want to dig into, and then pull that data back. Usually doing your analysis, what I'm also doing along this way is I'm actually exporting a lot of this data out. I constantly copy tables or export tables out. I keep different tabs open and I start stacking things within an Excel spreadsheet with different types of tabs. Like, here's the executed processes I gathered. Here's the systems. And once I'm diving into a certain system and trying to figure out what's going on, I'll make an Excel spreadsheet just for that. And I'll have every single thing I've exported from Tanium. And a lot of those I get out of stuff like from Trace, where now I have traces giving me every command line run by PowerShell over the last couple of days, and I can specifically see the endpoint it's on. Of course, once again, I can pivot right back into live connection and see additional details around that process as well. Some of the really useful items as well are listed underneath the threat response enterprise hunting, like I showed you earlier. Some of the ones I want to show you is code injection items too, where you can see injected threads. Threads that have potentially injected code in them. And what we actually have is tools on the endpoint that are looking for specific things. Types things by headers, and it's going to show you the PIDs, anything that's mapped incorrectly for memory. And so what I'll do is I'll actually grab all those information, and we omit ones for you, but that's because we have a listing on your endpoint. But if you don't want to omit any of the injected threads, you can show all of them. What's really useful about injected threads is what I would recommend you do in your environment, is you're only going to have so many of injected threads that are not omitted. I would actually get used to knowing what those are, and then anything that's different from that, I would take this information and send it out via connection into Splunk. And what I would do is start stacking anytime a new one comes out. Almost use it like another alerting. If I see a new thing come out and all of a sudden it's only a count of one and I've never seen it before, I get the directions, information around it. I can get what it actually is, the process itself, and how it's not mapped to any file, for example, is why this one hit. And actually you can see the allocated protections that are on it. The executed read-write was on there, what type of memory it was, and I can get actual information around it. And of course, from here, you can always pivot and drill down, get the computer it was on, figure what's happening. But injected threads is a great question to send out via connect, and using that new filter that I talked about earlier. Another one, there's a bunch of information within hunting around trace questions as well, mainly looking for things that are running and that have run and things that are running in memory as well. And some of those really useful ones are things around PowerShell. So with PowerShell, there's a couple different ones that I like to look at, which is like the version downgrade, because with version downgrades, you can run different things in PowerShell, get out of that protection policies as well, or look for suspicious command line arguments. What I'm showing here, though, is trace executed processes has multiple different parameterized sensors already filled out for you. These are just some of them. One of the ones, like I'll say, I'll click here and I'll show you what happens. What we actually have is a parameterized sensor set up for already to a day, which is great. It's already unstackable, so you're going to get the endpoint names. You're already going to know who they are. Maybe in this case, I want to make it stackable first. That's up to you. We've already filled in the regular expressions for you. So this is a good example of things to look for. Let me look at anything with PowerShell in the process path, and specifically look at types of command lines, things like upload file in there, or maybe something like create object, or the encoded deflate stream. You can see how these are all in here. You could even add more if this is your own. And then, of course, ask that question in your environment and get the answer back. Now, these are really useful ones to also put into saved questions and send out to Splunk as well, which you can always pivot from what you get out of these responses back into other questions, of course, if you're using the console. You can look like every HTTPS connection for PowerShell process. Or you can maybe actually look for a specific type of user, like an admin account, using network connections over 443 or 80, which maybe they shouldn't be doing with their admin accounts. Those are all very simple things that you could look for, send out to your destination like Splunk or some other SIM, and actually collect that information and analyze it. Those aren't really alerts. Those are just things to look into and pivot from. The other thing we talked about earlier was actually being able to take live information off of endpoints and saving it. Like I said, you can always go into a live endpoint and you can file browse, and you can actually download any file you find within there, like I said before. What's another thing you can also do is while you're doing an investigation of your endpoints and you're actually looking at different alerts and determining what's actually happening, some of the recommendations I have are also to save evidence along your way. Every time you get into a process details from an alert, you should click that save evidence button and actually save the evidence. And that evidence will then be placed within your evidence area as an event, so you can actually drill into different evidence as you find them. I'll show you that in a second as this connection gets established. But what's important there is you can keep that information, and then over time, use it for your reporting. It might have additional indicators you can go look at, like the IP addresses that are connected out as the evidence, or the new loads that were given. It's just a good use of all the information you can gather off those endpoints. So as an example, maybe you're looking at this endpoint and you're just looking at this SVC host analysis that you're doing. This button right here is what I'm talking about. As soon as you click here, what's really, really useful is you're going to get all the details around it. And you see it's basically everything plus the top area you saw, but also some more than you actually didn't see there. Some more information on the exit codes that might have been there, the end times, the domain was found, all very useful information to write up your reports. And what I do is usually just click and copy paste as I'm doing this. So as I write my report up, I'm gonna say, hey, we had a process called X. It was spawned off by this parent. Here was the command lines I had. You could take all this details, here's the command line, here was the user we identified doing it, and take all that information and throw into your tickets. And you can keep this information here so you can have it. At any point in time, you can always come in here and delete it and ensure that's removed from your network. What you can also do when you start saving evidence, as you see here, is pivot into actual remediation efforts. And we'll talk about a little more of those later, but you see right here with this one, I can create a protection policy based off this. It's a process, so I can just have a protection policy to kill it, have a rule in to block that policy from running by name, whatever it might be. Also, some more items with that hunting dashboard that we were talking about earlier. And what I really recommend you do is go through the hunting dashboard and start digging into different type of questions. I showed you auto-run program details earlier, but there's a lot of good information in certain ones in here that you really want to make sure you understand what your network looks like by running these. Some of the ones I'm going to look at are some of the ones I use a lot, which are something like scheduled tasks. With scheduled tasks, you're going to get everything with the @ and scheduled task in it. And these are every single task name in the command. This is a great information to keep and also set up as a new item filter on certain systems. So something like a domain controller again, or some other key system, should only have certain scheduled tasks on it. When a new one's written to scheduled task, you should know about it. So set these up as something that's actually sent out to your data analytic platform like Splunk again. Like I said, the auto-run files are also very, very useful. This one here will give you a high-level idea of the different auto-run files you have without giving you all those details you saw on the last one. You'll still get every file name and the hash of that file. And these are great things also to look at across your environment as something you can stack. And also you can look at things that are off. You can get new auto runs that are loaded every single time as well. So very, very, very useful stuff to collect on your environment. Let me go back to this system. The other one I want to look at as well is things that are actually coming out of DLL, load order hijacking. And these are basically, we look for certain instances that we see in your current running processes. So things are actually in memory running. And we look for specific things that look like they might be order hijacking happening with the DLLs we find there. So what that means is we're going to look through all your type libraries and search for anything that meets our requirements for that. Looking for those paths, looking to see if that DLL was even signed. And you're going to see a bunch of different ones pop in here. And some of the reasons it will pop up, we might find a process in new locations, like the SQL Server one here. There could be lots of information here. And you might get some false positives. But in your environment, what I recommend doing is digging into what you see here and kind of making sure you understand what was normal, what's not normal. And then once again, maybe set up a new item filter with this one. Kind of go through and look at those new items as they pop up. Loaded modules are also very useful. You can get loaded modules by certain things. I like looking just all of them. You can see real quickly all the fully qualified paths of every loaded module. But the other thing I like to do is actually stack them by processes. So if you know a specific process that you want to search for and see if anything's been loaded by it, you can do that here. Very simple by hunting in there. There's lots of different ways to look in it. The other one I like to send out very often is services. Have every services that are run on your endpoint and get all those services pulled are very useful. And you can grab those services back. So service statuses, you can have themselves. You can also have everything that's inside the service systems, event log, whatever it might be. One we talked about earlier was WMI event consumers. These are anything that's inside of ActiveScript and also command line. So keep that in mind. We're looking at those two areas. And what you want to look at is specifically the command line templates that are used here. And what you'll find is you won't have too many diffs in these. And when you do have differences, when there is those one-offs, those are ones you want to dig into. Potentially, you'd want to actually make this one very much a new item filter because you might have the same across the C script kernel cat, for example, could be across everybody in your entire environment. So you don't want to see that every single time. So use that new item filter and connect, send it out, and then you'll get every time a new one pops up. The other ones I like to look at too are account lockouts. Because account lockouts can really tell you if someone's misusing their account. So you can actually get an account lockout from every single endpoint and actually see those account lockouts themselves. You can also send anytime someone clears the event log, you can actually that be sent over to Splunk as well. So someone has actually cleared their either the evidence that they have or whatever it might be. Also, it's worthwhile also to start checking the login events itself. You can use trace to look at a login events, or you can explicitly look for ones, like you can actually search specific types of logons. This one, for example, if you have a user you're looking for, like I know that my user ends in ADM, I can actually look back for 24 hours for any time that was done over a network logon. Or I can maybe look at it anytime as a proxy logon or whatever it might be. And actually you can get those, this is that over the network, someone's using an ADM account, and why are they using it? And you can go and research from there. These are the type of things I would build out of saved questions and then also send over to Splunk as well. Some of the more user behavior ones, a lot of the ones I use for that are things around trace executed processes. Because what's great about trace executed processes is we also get details around the user of actually who opened and actually ran that process. So what you could easily do is if you have a list of types of users that are maybe admins, you could do that type of regex statement that we saw before, where you can have the type of admins, maybe they all end with ADM or they start with ADM, end with admin or whatever it might be. Those are easy ways to do it. Or if you're hunting a user, easily just put their username in here and start looking at any time they open up things that they could use, like command lines, PowerShell, running VBS scripts, whatever it might be, looking at all those different items that they might have. So this is a pretty high level of some of the items that you would want to start with hunting. There's a lot of details in there. What I would recommend you do is first understand the type of systems you have. Start stacking certain things like things in auto runs, things in persistence. Then start looking at things like file types and where files are located and what normally is located in certain key file areas. Start tracking when people, get rid of certain types of, security events are removed from the network. Start looking at types of command lines run by certain processes. Is it normal that PowerShell every day launches at 6 a.m. with a certain command line? And actually get used to that, because that's probably the admin script. So anytime you see somebody else using a different command line, you can actually spin up and say, hey, maybe I need to go look into that. But you can't do that until you start reviewing this data. And that takes time. And what I recommend you do is just continue to look through these different types of hunting questions and maybe focus on a few of them at a time. Maybe focus on, auto runs for a while, and maybe then focus on command lines of processes. And then start looking at maybe who's handling a process, whatever it might be, and get used to what the normal is in your environment. Because that's really hunting is. It's just basically finding the abnormal. So after this, what we'll work on the next series of videos will be around remediation efforts. And the things you can do once you did determine that badness did occur, and what can you do about it? We'll be showing things you can do directly with just the platform, and then I'll walk into things you can actually do around using Protect.